A telephone number is a sequence of digits assigned to a fixed-line telephone subscriber station connected to a telephone line or to a wireless, electronic telephony device, such as a radio telephone or a mobile telephone, or to other devices for data transmission via the public switched telephone network or other private networks. Most telephone numbers are assigned to one telephone line or one mobile telephone, and most lines or mobiles have one number. A telephone number serves as an address for switching telephone calls using a system of destination routing. Telephone numbers are entered or dialed by a calling party on the originating telephone set, which transmits the sequence of digits in the process of signaling to a telephone exchange. The exchange completes the call either to another locally connected subscriber or via the PSTN to the called party. The use of telephone numbers instead of subscriber names to indicate to the telephone operator what destination line a caller wished to be connected to was developed and first used in the autumn of 1879 in Lowell, Massachusetts during a measles epidemic. Moses Greeley Parker, a local doctor, realized that if all four of the city's operators were incapacitated by the epidemic, their replacements would have great trouble quickly learning which of the switchboard's 200 jacks were assigned to which subscribers. He recommended the use of numbers instead. The local bell company management at first protested that its customers would consider their designation by numbers to be beneath their dignity. Nevertheless, it saw the logic of the doctor's suggestion and followed it. The subscribers were not outraged. The epidemic quickly passed, but telephone numbers did not. Overview. When telephone numbers were first used, they were very short, from 1 to 3 digits, and were communicated orally to a switchboard operator when initiating a call. As telephone systems have grown and interconnected to encompass worldwide communication, telephone numbers have become longer. In addition to telephones, they have been used to access other devices, such as computer modems, pages, and fax machines, with landlines, modems and pages falling out of use in favor of all digital, always connected broadband internet and mobile phones. Telephone numbers are now instead taken by data-only cellular devices, such as some tablet computers, digital cameras, and even game controllers and mobile hotspots, on which it is not even possible to make or accept a phone call. The number contains the information necessary to identify uniquely the intended endpoint for the telephone call. Each such endpoint must have a unique number within the public switched telephone network. Most countries use fixed-length numbers, and therefore the number of endpoints determines the necessary length of the telephone number. It is also possible for each subscriber to have a set of shorter numbers for the endpoints most often used. These shorthand, or speed calling, numbers are automatically translated to unique telephone numbers before the call can be connected. Some special services have their own short numbers. The dialing plan in some areas permits dialing numbers in the local calling area without using area code or city code prefixes. For example, a telephone number in North America consists of a 3-digit area code, a 3-digit central office code, and 4 digits for the line number. If the area has no area code overlays, 7-digit dialing may be permissible for calls within the area, but some areas have implemented mandatory 10-digit dialing. Other special phone numbers are used for high-capacity numbers with several telephone circuits. Typically a request line to a radio station where dozens or even hundreds of callers may be trying to call in at once, such as for a contest. For each large metro area, all of these lines will share the same prefix, the last digits typically corresponding to the station's frequency, call sign, or moniker. In the International Telephone Network, the format of telephone numbers is standardized by ITUT Recommendation E164. This specifies that the entire number should be 15 digits or shorter, and begin with a country prefix. For most countries, this is followed by an area code or city code and the subscriber number, which might consist of the code for a particular telephone exchange. ITUT Recommendation E123 describes how to represent an international telephone number in writing or print, starting with a plus sign and the country code. When calling an international number from a landline phone, the plus must be replaced with the international call prefix chosen by the country the call is being made from. Many mobile phones allow the plus to be entered directly, by pressing and holding the 0 for GSM phones, or sometimes asterisk for CDMA phones. The format and allocation of local phone numbers are controlled by each nation's respective government, either directly or by sponsored organizations. In the United States, each state's Public Service Commission regulates, as does the Federal Communications Commission. In Canada, which shares the same country code with the U.S., regulation is mainly through the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. Teleconversion is the process or act of changing one's telephone number while remaining with the same telephone company, often due to relocation. Conversely, local number portability allows a person to move his or her existing phone number to another carrier. The two processes converge in the instance of a port-in teleconversion, where an existing number is changed to one which is brought from another carrier. This may occur where a person takes a wireline number and ports it to an existing cell phone, or where a new line is activated but the port-in request is still pending. The teleconversion then occurring when the porting process successfully completes. Number portability usually has geographic limitations, such as an existing local phone company only being able to port to a competitor within the same rate center. Mobile carriers may have much larger regions called markets, which can assign or accept numbers from any area within the region. These markets vary depending on carrier. Within most North American rate centers, local wireline calls are free, while calls to all but a few nearby rate centers are considered long-distance and incur a per-minute toll. In a few large U.S. cities, as well as most points outside North America, local calls are not flat-rated or free by default. The world's largest toll-free calling areas are the Atlanta metropolitan area and Greater Toronto area exchanges reachable locally from the respective downtown rate centers. Both span multiple area codes in some combination of split plans and overlay plans. U.S. history. In the late 1870s, the Bell Interests started utilizing their patent with a rental scheme, in which they would rent their instruments to individual users who would contract with other suppliers to connect them, for example from home to office to factory. Western Union and the Bell Company both soon realized that a subscription service would be more profitable. With the invention of the telephone switchboard or central office, such an office was staffed by an operator who connected the calls by personal names. Some have argued that use of the telephone altered the physical layout of American cities. The latter part of 1879 and the early part of 1880 saw the first use of telephone numbers at Lowell, Massachusetts. During an epidemic of measles, the physician, Dr. Moses Greeley Parker, feared that Lowell's 4 telephone operators might all succumb to sickness and bring about paralysis of telephone service. He recommended the use of numbers for calling Lowell's more than 200 subscribers so that substitute operators might be more easily trained in such an emergency. Parker was convinced of the telephone's potential, began buying stock, and by 1883 he was one of the largest individual stockholders in both the American Telephone Company and the New England Telephone and Telegraph Company. Even after the assignment of numbers, operators still connected most calls into the early 20th century. Hello, Central. Get me Underwood 342, connecting through operators or Central was the norm until mechanical direct dialing of numbers became more common in the 1920s. In rural areas with magneto-crank telephones connected to party lines, The local phone number consisted of the line number plus the ringing pattern of the subscriber. To dial a number such as 3R122 meant making a request to the operator, the third-party line, followed by turning the telephone's crank once, a short pause, then twice and twice again. Also common was a code of long and short rings, so one party's call might be signaled by two longs and another's by two longs followed by a short. It was not uncommon to have over a dozen ring cadences on one line. In the most areas of North America, telephone numbers in metropolitan communities consisted of a combination of digits and letters. Starting in the 1920s until the 1960s, letters were translated to dialed digits, a mapping that was displayed directly on the telephone dial. Each of the digits 2 to 9, and sometimes 0, corresponded to a group of typically 3 letters. The leading 2 or 3 letters of a telephone number indicated the exchange name, for example, Edgewood and Ivanhoe, and were followed by 5 or 4 digits. The limitations that these systems presented in terms of usable names that were easy to distinguish and spell, and the need for a comprehensive numbering plan that enabled direct distance dialing, led to the introduction of all-number dialing in the 1960s. The use of numbers starting in 555 to represent fictional numbers in U.S. movies, television, and literature originated in this period. The 555 prefix was reserved for telephone company use and was only consistently used for directory assistance, being 5551212 for the local area. An attempt to dial a 555 number from a movie in the real world will always result in an error message when dialed from a phone in the United States. This reduces the likelihood of nuisance calls. Also, Quincy was used, because there was no queue available. Phone numbers were traditionally tied down to a single location, because exchanges were hardwired. The first 3 digits of any number were tied to the geographic location of the exchange. Alphanumeric telephone numbers, because the switches were hardwired together and fairly hard to rewire. Telephone exchange buildings in many larger cities in North America were dedicated to circuits that began with the first 2 or 3 digits of the standard 7-digit phone numbers. In a holdover from the days of plugboard exchanges, the exchanges were typically named with a name whose first 2 letters translated to the digits of the exchange's prefix on a common telephone dial. Examples: Castle, Trinity, Mutual, and Klondike. Certain number combinations were not amenable to this naming process, such as 57, 95, and 97. It was in part due to this factor that telephone exchange names were finally abandoned, since more numbers were needed to prevent a given area code. In the past, the first 2 or 3 digits could be represented by a mnemonic exchange name of e.g. 869-1234 was formerly Townsend 9-1234, and before that might have been Townsend 1234, or it could have been Townsend 1234 in December 1930. New York City became the first city in the United States to adopt the 2-letter, 5-number format. It remained alone in this respect until well after World War II, when other municipalities across the country began to follow suit. From the 1920s through the 1950s, most larger American cities used the Bell system standard format of 2 letters which began the exchange name followed by 4 numbers, as in Dunkirk 0799. Prior to the mid-1950s, the number immediately following the name could never be a 0 or 1. Indeed, 0 was never pressed into service at all, except in the immediate Los Angeles area. In 1955, the Bell system attempted to standardize the process of naming exchanges by issuing a recommended list of names to be used for the various number combinations. In 1961, the New York Telephone Company introduced selected letter exchanges, in which the 2 letters did not mark the start of any particular name. and by 1965 all newly connected phone numbers nationwide consisted of numerals only. Pre-existing numbers continued to be displayed the old way in many places well into the 1970s. For example, Bushell, a company outside Chicago, still uses Hudson 3-2700 in their commercials. Because the pulses from a rotary dial took time, having a phone number with lots of 8s, 9s, or 0s meant it took longer to dial the number. The phone companies typically assigned such high numbers to payphones because they were rarely dialed to. In popular culture, Australian films and television shows do not employ any recurring format for fictional telephone numbers. Any number quoted in such media may be used by a real subscriber. The 555 code is used in the Balmain area of Sydney and the suburbs of Melbourne, although in many areas being a prefix of 55 plus the 1000 digit of 5 would be valid. The numbering system was changed so that 555 became 9555 in Sydney and Melbourne, and in the country, there are 2 new digits ahead of the 55. However, elsewhere, as in the United States, fictitious telephone numbers are often used in films and on television to avoid disturbances by calls from viewers. For example, the United States 555 exchange code was never assigned. Therefore, American films and TV shows have used 555 XXXX numbers, in order to prevent a number used in such a work from being called. The film Bruce Almighty originally featured a number that did not have the 555 prefix. In the cinematic release, God leaves 776-2323 on a pager for Bruce Nolan to call if he needed God's help. The DVD changes this to a 555 number. According to Universal Studios, which produced the movie, the number it used was picked because it did not exist in Buffalo, New York, where the movie was set. However, the number did exist in other cities, resulting in customers having that number receiving random calls from people asking for God. While some played along with the gag, others found the calls aggravating. Music. The number in the Glenn Miller Orchestra's hit song, Pennsylvania 6-5000, is the number of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. The number is now written as 1-212-736-5000. According to the hotel's website, Pennsylvania 6-5000 is New York's oldest continually assigned telephone number and possibly the oldest continuously assigned number in the world. Tommy Two-Tone's hit song, 867-5309, Jenny, led to many customers who actually had that number receiving a plethora of unwanted calls. United Kingdom. In the UK, letters were assigned to numbers in a similar fashion as in North America, except that the letter O was allocated to the digit 0. Digit 6 had only M and N. This was necessary because French dials already had Q on the 0 position, and there were exchange names in the Paris region which contained the letter Q. Most of the United Kingdom had no lettered telephone dials until the introduction of subscriber trunk dialing in 1958. Prior to that time, with the introduction of trunk dialing, the need for all callers to be able to dial numbers with letters in them led to the much more widespread use of lettered dials. The need for dials with letters was finally abandoned with the conversion to all-digit numbering in 1968. Intercepted number. In the middle 20th century in North America, when a call could not be completed, for example because the phone number was not assigned, had been disconnected, or was experiencing technical difficulties, the call was routed to an intercept operator who informed the caller. In the 1970s, this service was converted to automatic intercept systems which automatically choose and present an appropriate intercept message. Disconnected numbers are reassigned to new users after the rate of calls to them declines. Outside of North America, operator intercept was rare, and in most cases calls to unassigned or disconnected numbers would result in a recorded message or number unobtainable tone being returned to the caller.